Okay, let's dive into this. We're looking at a piece of tech so literally everywhere across human history, we kind of forget it even had to be invented. And actually, not just invented, but painstakingly updated, refined, and patched over hundreds of thousands of years. Yeah, we're talking about the spear. We're going to look at this not just as a hunting tool, but as humanity's absolute longest-running technological upgrade. It's basically our very first piece of truly open-source hardware. It's this brilliant timeline of engineering, so let's see exactly how our ancestors engineered their own survival.
So, I want you to seriously think about a totally terrifying scenario for just a second. How do you take down a massive, towering mammoth with literally nothing more than a flimsy wooden stick? I mean, it sounds totally absurd, right? But for ancient hominids, this wasn't some hypothetical thought experiment. No, this was the absolute high-stakes reality of daily survival. The need for food was immense and, well, immediate. In early humans, we didn't have natural weapons. No massive claws, no razor-sharp fangs, no thick armored hides. We just had our brains, and whatever raw wood we could scavenge in our environment. It's the ultimate David versus Goliath scenario, where human ingenuity had to bridge this massive physical gap just to survive another day.
Which brings us to our first major era. Section 1, the Alpha Build, Wood and Fire.
Our timeline starts incredibly far back. We're talking around 400,000 BCE. There was this remarkable finding in Schoningen, Germany, where archaeologists uncovered 8 intact spears. But the absolutely crucial point here is how these ancient engineers actually manufactured them. Because they didn't just snap a dead branch off a tree and call it a day. No way. It was a deliberate engineered process. Step 1 involved taking a flint shaver and painstakingly scraping, peeling, and cutting away the tip of a thick pole to form a really precise aerodynamic point. But Step 2? Step 2 is where the real genius lies. They singed that newly carved tip directly in the fire. By applying intense, controlled heat, they chemically hardened the wood. They completely transformed a soft, simple stick into a significantly more rigid, durable, and effective weapon that could actually withstand a massive impact.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Mammoth Problem, Tactics and Survival.
Now, you might be wondering, how do we know for sure what these early fire-hardened spears were actually used for? Well, another incredible discovery gives us the physical proof. Over in Thuringen, Germany, researchers found a complete wooden spear physically embedded inside a massive mammoth skeleton. I mean, wow! This physical evidence strongly proves these early tools were utilized primarily as heavy hunting weapons, not just for warfare or self-defense against other hominids. And when you really think about it, it's a terrifying mismatch. A flimsy wooden log up against a giant charging mammoth? To even consider stepping up to a creature of that immense size and sheer power with just a singed wooden stick, that highlights an intense, desperate need for food and just immense bravery on the part of the hunters.
But here is the fascinating twist regarding their strategy. They weren't just charging head-on in some suicidal frontal assault. Actually, their primary tactic was psychological and environmental. They used those flimsy spears, often in combination with fire and loud shouting, to literally scare the mammoth. The whole goal was to frighten and drive these massive, panicked beasts in a very specific direction. They used the natural terrain to funnel them directly into traps, bogs, or deep pits that the hunting party had previously dug out and disguised. So the spear, at least in this initial alpha build stage, was just as much a tool of psychological redirection and herding as it was a piercing instrument.
That brings us to Section 3, the Stone Age Upgrades, version 2.0.
Okay, so we're jumping significantly forward in the timeline now, to around 60,000 BCE. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that early humans essentially crowdsourced a massive global upgrade to their hardware, basically making that pure wood design we just talked about totally obsolete. We see this major update happening simultaneously across wildly different environments all around the globe. In France, Neanderthals living in rock shelters and temporary hunting camps started sharpening small pieces of flint and slotting them directly into the tips of their wooden spears. Meanwhile, completely independent of them, hunters tracking game across the harsh conditions of the Sahara were using sharpened stones in the exact same manner. And over in the Americas, Central American groups were upgrading their spears using a completely different yet incredibly effective local material, obsidian.
Let's define exactly what that is, because it represents a massive technological leap for the time. Obsidian is a naturally occurring volcanic glass. Now, because of the really specific way volcanic glass fractures and flakes when it's struck, it creates an edge that is viscerally, terrifyingly sharp. Like, on a microscopic level, it's actually much sharper than standard worked stone or even many modern steel surgical scalpels. It's crazy. By discovering and utilizing this specific material, Central American hunters were able to craft incredibly lethal spear tips. This drastically increased the cutting power, penetration, and just the overall deadliness of their weapons.
Zooming out to the global picture for a second, this era brought about the widespread use of microliths. What are those? Well, they're tiny, meticulously sharpened blades worked from small stones or flints. Stone Age people all around the world gradually adopted this highly effective technique. See, instead of relying purely on a single carved wooden point that could easily break and ruin the entire spear, they learned to consistently slot these razor-sharp microliths into grooves carved into the wood, securing them with plant resins and animal sinew. This fundamentally changed the lethality and, crucially, the modular design of the spear worldwide. Think about it. If a microlith chipped, you just replaced the tiny stone blade. You didn't have to throw away the whole wooden shaft. It was a brilliant efficiency upgrade.
Which pushes us into our final era. Section 4, the metalworking revolution, the final leap. So this is where the pace of human technological advancement rapidly, and I mean dramatically, accelerates. The millennia-long reliance on stone, flint, and volcanic glass suddenly gives way to the greatest single advance in spear technology, metalworking. And this brilliantly illustrates the chronological leaps we took. We see it begin after 5000 BCE with the extraction and shaping of copper in Southeast Europe. Then, human engineers figured out true metallurgy. They started melting and combining an alloy of copper and tin to produce bronze around 2300 BCE. Finally, a millennium after that, the Iron Age arrives. These specific, super rapid technological breakthroughs allowed hunters and warriors to mass-produce spear points that were exceptionally hard, permanently sharp, incredibly durable, and just vastly more effective than literally any stone tool that came before them.
It all goes to show that human survival has always relied on our relentless drive to innovate, adapt, and refine our tools. What you should ultimately take away from this journey is that humanity's greatest strength has never been our sheer physical power. We were never the biggest or the fastest animals on the savannah, not even close. But from scraping wood with flint in prehistoric Germany, to figuring out the perfect chemical alloy for bronze, to forging iron weapons, our dominant survival trait is, and always has been, our capacity for continuous engineering and relentless problem solving. We iterate, we improve, and we survive.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. For 400,000 years, the spear wasn't just a weapon. It was humanity's first draft of innovation. The next time you look at the incredibly complex technology we use today, the smartphones in our pockets or the rockets we send into space, remember the epic timeline of human ingenuity it took to get here. Because it all started with a single singed wooden pole. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.